Hey everybody. So I'm using a slightly different platform here for this recording. So just trying different things and seeing what's going to work out the best. So hopefully domain and range went pretty well. If not, don't panic about that. We'll kind of work on that throughout the year. And like I said, as we get more comfortable with all the different functions that we're using, domain and range you should pick up okay. So as long as you have the notation and you have the good general idea of what domain and range is talking about, then we'll be okay. So today we're going to talk about one of the functions that you were looking at, but maybe you didn't know what it was, or you didn't know how to come up with an equation for it. So these are called piecewise functions. Okay. Now, if you remember, you don't have to write this down, but just a quick example so you know what I'm talking about. It was the graph that maybe it looks something like this. So there's like a piece here, and then it looked like a completely different equation on the other side. So we're piecing our graph together. It's called piecewise function. All right, so I want to give you a real-world example here of a way you might use a piecewise function. So let's say you have a job, and at your job you make $10 per hour for the first 40 hours. So if you work 40 hours a week, you're going to make $10 an hour, and that's your salary. Okay? But if you work overtime, you can make what's called time and a half for any time over 40 hours. Okay? So what's time and a half mean? Time and a half means you make your $10 an hour, but you make an additional half of that. So half of that would be 5. So you make 10 plus 5. So your overtime pay is $15 per hour. Okay? So you want to know how much you're gonna make. What am I gonna make if I work, I don't know, how many hours do you want to work this week? Let's say 47. So let's find f of 47. So if I work 47 hours, how much will I make? Alright, so I'm going to have you pause the video and see if you can calculate, if you work 47 hours, how much money you're going to make. Ready, pause. Okay, so how did you figure this out? Well, a couple ways you could have done it, but probably you did something like this. So if you work 40 hours, you make $10 an hour. So 40 times 10, so that's $400. So you made $400 for the first 40 hours, and then there is 7 additional hours. So for your overtime, you had worked 7 hours times 15. 7 times 15, is that 105? Nope, so this is going to be really awkward. So then you add those up, and so you made $505 a week. That's not a bad week. Okay? So that is an example of a piecewise function. If you work 40 hours, that's how much you're making an hour. But our equation changes if I work more than 40 hours. Now it's going to be more than just $10 an hour. Now it's $15 an hour. Okay? So here's what I want to do. I want to do a couple things. Do we need to make a table? Maybe make a quick table. We can write an equation for this piecewise function, and I want to graph it. All right? So let me go ahead and erase this. So we're going to stick with this same function, but I want to come up with an equation, and I want to graph it. All right? So let's start with a little table here. You guys know, or you'll figure it out quick if you don't know. I love tables. So my input, that's going to be hours. My output, we can call it f of x. That's going to be how much money I make. Now let's think about what values would make sense to plug in here. Probably no negative numbers, right? You can't work negative hours. So we can start with 0, and then maybe let's go up by 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 if we're feeling crazy. So I want you to pause the video for a minute, see if you can fill in your output values. Okay? Ready, pause. Okay, so how'd you do? So if I work 0 hours, I make $0. $10, I'm making $10 an hour, so that'd be $100. $20, I'm still making $10 an hour, so that'd be $200. 30, 300, 40, 400, 50. Oh, now it's a little bit more complicated, right? How did we say we figure this out? So you make $400 for the first 40 hours, and then I have 10 additional overtime hours. I'm making $15 an hour in overtime. 10 times 15, that'd be $150. So add that up, that'd be $550. Okay. 60, same idea. So for 40 hours, I make $400 plus I work 20 hours of overtime. 20 times 15, is that 300? I hope so. And so add those together and we get 700. Okay? So there's our table. That's a nice little table there. So that table might come in handy. All right. So now let's talk about how am I going to graph this. All right, we got this. So let's make a little XY plane here. So my x-axis is going to be number of hours. My y-axis is going to be total number of dollars that I made. All right. So where's the breaking point here? Where's the number of hours I have to work before something kind of goofy happens? So that breaking point is 40, right? All the way up until 40. This is just a really simple function, and then after 40, that's where it gets a little weird. So let's just graph from 0 to 40 to start. So if we plot some points, so 0 hours, I make $0, and then if I work 10 hours, let's see, how do I want to make this scale? We can go up 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. All right, so 10 hours, I made 100. 20 hours, I'm at 200. 30 hours, I'm at 300. 40 hours, I'm at 400. Okay, so this is a nice linear function for the first 40 hours, right? It's just $10 an hour. It doesn't get much more linear than that. So then after 40, how am I supposed to figure that out? So pause the video for a second, see if you can come up with what is the rest of this graph going to look like? Because it's not the same rate anymore. So it's not just going to be the same line extended. We're going to have to do something a little bit different here. So why don't you pause for a sec and see if you can figure out what this is going to look like. Ready, pause. So what did you do here? We have these values here. Let's go ahead and plot these points. So at 50 hours, now I'm at 550. So I'm all the way up there. At 60 hours, I'm at 700. Oh, I got to extend my graph. All the way up here. So this is still linear, I think. It just has a different slope, right? Because my rate was $10 an hour, now it's 15. So what do? Is at 40, what if I added like 41 hours? How much am I going to make? Well, that's going to be 400 plus that extra hour would be 15, so 415. So what happens here is it's still linear, but now I just have a steeper line. And that might be hard to see on my screen, but this line is a regular line. The slope is over 10 up 100. But then here, now my line should be steeper. Okay? And if maybe I can make that a little bit more dramatic. Whoa, look how much steeper that is. Can you believe that? But that's what's going to happen here. So we have two pieces of my graph. We have a piece from 0 to 40, and then a piece for after 40. And so we get this piecewise function. All right. So then the last thing I want to do with this problem is I want to write an equation for this function. Okay? So with piecewise functions, you probably saw this at one point in your life, but they look a little weird at first. So f of x, that's the name of our function. And we get this, we're going to start with this big squiggly bracket. So it's the same symbol we use for our set notation, but now it's just zoom. It's just a big sum here. So what we're going to do is we're going to write the equation for the first 40 hours up here, and then we're going to write the equation for what happens after 40 hours down here. Okay? So let's start with this blue graph here. So what's that equation? It's linear. The slope is $10 per hour. The y-intercept is 0. So the equation is just 10 times x. Take the number of hours times 10. But I need to tell whoever is looking at this equation, when do I use this part of my equation? And so when do I use that? I use that from 0 to 40. And so I'm just going to write, use this when x is between 0 and 40. So there's the first part. Okay? Now, the second part of this equation is a little bit trickier. Your first instinct, what is your first instinct? What part of the equation should go here? So I'm going to have you pause your video. What equation do I write here? Ready? Pause. Okay, so don't write this down. Let's just talk about it for a second. My guess is a lot of you just did 15x. That's my first instinct. This is $10 an hour, so then $15 an hour would be the second part, right? How can I check this, though? So to check this, we need this equation to work. So if I plug in, let's say 50 hours, that's on my table. If I plug in 50 to this part of the equation, I want to get 550 back out. That's what I want to have happen with my equation, right? Well, what happens if you plug in 50? What's 15 times 50? Isn't that like 750 or something? It's not that number, because I'm not just doing $15 an hour for 50 hours. I have to take into account that I already used up 40 hours up here. So what can I do to this equation to adjust it so that it's not just 15 times the number of hours, but it's only after that first 40 hours that I worked? So some of you guys maybe had it. So what about this? 15 times parentheses x minus 40. So why do I need that? So the reason I need this x minus 40, if I plug in 50 hours, what is that going to do? It's going to do 50 minus 40, which is 10. So I have 10 hours of overtime times 15. Okay? And then what else do I need here? Because this part gives me how much I made in overtime, but I also need to account for what did I make in the first 40 hours. So how much did I make in those first 40 hours? Well, in 40 hours, I made $10 an hour, so that'd be plus $400. So this is an equation that can work. So 400, this represents the first 40 hours, and then the 15 times x minus 40, this represents my overtime. Because I'm going to plug in however many hours I worked over 40, subtract it from 40, that's going to give me my overtime hours, times my $15 an hour, and then add on how much I made in just regular hours. Okay? So, when do I use this equation? Well, I'm only going to use it when x is greater than 40 hours. So there's my piecewise function. Okay? So take a look at that. So this notation is kind of a big deal. I want to use this when x is more than 40. I want to use this when x is in between 0 and 40. So last thing with this problem, what if I wanted to know how much did you make if you worked 30 hours? Or how much do you make if you worked 45 hours? How do I know where to plug those numbers in? So f of 30. So I want to plug in 30. Well, how do I know where to plug in 30? Well, if you look, 30 is in between 0 and 40, so that tells me use the top part of my equation. So 30 times 10, 300. F of 45. How do I know where to plug that in? Do I plug it in up here, or do I plug it in down here? Well, 45 is more than 40. It's not in between 0 and 40, so I'll use this bottom equation. So if I plug in 45, 45 minus 40 is 5. 5 times 15 is 75. 75 plus 40 is 475. Okay? So that's it for part 1 of piecewise functions.